Hi everyone. There's a war going on in West Asia right now, and Indian market is falling more than the countries that are at war. Let that sink in. So US is down around 7.5%. Israel is trading nearly at the same level as it was trading before the start of war. China is down 6%. Europe is down around 8%, whereas India is already down 12.5% versus the high that it made in February. And that too when Europe was in a consistent bull market for the past 1 year, whereas India has been in a bear market for at least 18 months now. So that begs the obvious question: why is India getting hit harder than the countries involved in the conflict? And in today's video, we will cover exactly that. So the answer to this question lies in a narrow stretch of water which is known as the Strait of Hormuz. Let's first understand what is exactly the Strait of Hormuz. So Strait of Hormuz is the narrow stretch of water that you see in this circle. Exactly, to be precise, this area is known as the Strait of Hormuz. This is the gateway for the ships crossing from the Indian Ocean into the Persian Gulf, which touches United Arab Emirates, Qatar, Bahrain, Kuwait, and major ports of Saudi Arabia and even the ports of Iran. So anything that has to go in and out of this area has to pass through the Strait of Hormuz. There is no other alternative. And this is a very critical choke point that 20% of world's oil trade passes through this narrow stretch of water that is only 35 kilometers at the narrowest point. So between this point and this point, this stretch is just 35 kilometers wide. And let's just not consider 35 kilometers. So the average usable area is just 4 to 5 kilometers wide, because in rest of the areas the depth of this strait is not consistent for the larger tankers. So this over here is the data of the number of ships that are passing through the Strait of Hormuz every day. So you can see that this number was somewhere around 100, 120 every ships every day. But now, since the start of the war, which was 28th of February, this number has effectively come down to 1 or 2 or 3 ships passing every day. And there is no solution to this problem in foresight. The entire oil that was being pumped out of the Gulf countries is choked over there, and there are no imports that can go from the Indian Ocean into the Gulf countries. So basically what this means that the import and export to all the Gulf countries, including UAE, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Qatar, Iraq, Bahrain, etc., is at risk for India. And subsequently in this video, we will cover what are the imports and exports exactly, and what is the second order consequence of the impact on those line items for India. So let us take a look at the import data first. So as you can see on this slide, for India, the largest line item of import from these countries is the energy. And within energy, let us first cover crude oil. India imports around 40% of its total crude oil consumption from these countries, and crude oil impacts everything. If prices of crude goes up, so your food prices, FMCG prices, cement, steel prices will automatically go up, and this will directly impact the inflation, which will lead to tightening of the fiscal policy, rising interest rates, and a stress on the leveraged company, especially the companies that have fuel as a high percentage to their overall cost, like airline companies, your logistic companies will be under tremendous amount of stress when crude oil goes up. India, and the second line item out of the energy basket is LPG. LPG is directly linked to a household, and especially in rural and middle and lower income strata, rising cylinder cost directly impacts the budgeting of the house. And also LPG has been a politically sensitive subject that governments have been made and broken because of the rising or falling cylinder prices. So this is again a very high sensitive line item for India. The third line item is, I think, the one which is impacted the most, which is natural gas. Because if you think about crude oil, suppose Middle Eastern oil is not flowing to India, the price will obviously rise. There will be a demand destruction in African and poorer Asian countries. But India will still source its crude oil from Russia or Mediterranean countries or even Brazil and Indonesia. But there is no credible alternative to LNG for now, because Qatar is second or third largest supply exporter of LNG in the entire world, and Qatar has been completely choked, and there is no alternate supply that India can source right now. US and Russia are very, they have a lot of LNG reserves, but they mine and use the LNG for their own consumption. They don't export as much as Qatar would export. So no immediate alternative, and LNG is heavily used in industrial applications in India. So industries are directly hit wherever you see that, example, your glass industry or your ceramic industry, your tile industry, that those industries will be running out of fuel very soon. Urea and fertilizer will also be hit because natural gas is both a feedstock as well as fuel for urea and fertilizers. Then your textile, food processing, sponge iron, power plants, and foundries of auto ancillaries will be hit, which is why you would be seeing that auto companies are falling a lot, because if LNG is in shortage, auto ancillary company, for example, if there's a Bajaj motorcycle and the handle is sourced from a company that runs its furnace on LNG, while Bajaj might be able to secure all the other components, but handle is not there, they'll not be able to ship out a motorcycle. Hence, you will see that auto companies have fallen a lot because of this crisis. Your conventional media will tell you because there is an increasing fuel price, hence there will be a demand destruction in auto. I think that's not the case. The case is that auto companies are highly dependent on supply chain, and in their supply chain there will be suppliers who run their furnaces on LNG with no alternatives. That's why these companies are hit. So this is a third and or fourth order of consequence of LNG being hit. Now, coming to the chemicals basket, of course, you can see that we import a lot of chemicals which are the feedstocks to plastics, textile, automotive hosieries, solvents, detergents, paints, and millions of other products which use plastics and polymers. So this industry and this sector will be directly hit because our imports are under stress. Then the last bucket will be your fertilizers, which are urea and phosphates. So India still imports around 10% of urea and phosphate from the Middle East, and this shock can directly impact the agriculture output of the country, which will have further a consequence on the rural economy, because farmers will be earning less, they will be spending less. B, since there will be a shortage of supply of agri products, the inflation, the food inflation will be rising. So not a good scenario to paint by any metric. So thus far we have covered how imports are being impacted, and as you can see, the impact is very real. And if you look at the second, third, fourth order of consequence, I would say that nearly all the industries are hit in one way or the other. And inflation will definitely keep on rising until we bring down the energy prices. So it's really a tough situation. Markets are not falling out of the blues. There's a proper fundamental reasons as to why markets are seeing this panic selling that we are observing. Now let's just cover the export section also for brief, because export is not an existential threat for India. So while you will see that there will be revenue loss to some companies and taxation loss to the government of India, but unlike the imports, the exports are not existential threat to our economy. So on the slide, you can see what do we export to Middle East that is currently under stress. So we have gold and diamond jewelry, rice, sugar, meat and other agri products, chemicals, pharma, engineering goods, auto components, textiles and plastics. Combined, they constitute around 50 billion, which is a very big amount of trade. But like I said, it's not an existential crisis for India if these exports are choked for a while. And this brings us to the end of the video. So what did we learn so far? We learned so far that if we think in first order of consequence, since US, Israel, Iran at war, you would expect that US and Israel stock market will fall more than the rest of the world, but that's not the case. You have to think in second and third order consequences. Then you will realize why Asian market, particularly Indian market, is reacting more aggressively as compared to the countries that are at war. And So that's the key learning for me. But let's close this video with one last question. Can the Strait of Hormuz be closed for long? And for this, let's have an objective view rather than painting a doomsday scenario. So there are three or four main parties to this entire war. The first being Iran, Israel, USA, and the Middle Eastern countries. And let's look how does the Strait of Hormuz closure impact each of these players. So first consider Iran. Iran is at war and it needs money to fund the war. How will money come? It will come through trade. And what does Iran trade? It trades crude oil. It basically exports crude oil to China, to other countries. And where does it export the crude oil from? Strait of Hormuz. It will Iran will need equipment to rebuild the infra that has been bombed. It will need critical components of its fighting machine, for example, missile components, your drone components, your radar components, etc. Where will the imports come from? They will either come from Caspian Sea, which Russia can supply, or they will come through Strait of Hormuz. So again, for Iran, it is not beneficial to close the Strait of Hormuz for very long. Let's consider the Gulf countries. For Gulf countries, this is completely existential. Their entire economy runs on oil and gas. They are not able to export this. Strait of Hormuz closure is definitely not in their benefit. But what's even worse is that these countries are not self-sufficient on food. They import most of the food from India and other Asian countries. And where does that food pass from? It passes from Strait of Hormuz. So you can see that Middle Eastern countries would also not like to have Strait of Hormuz closed for long. Now consider USA. USA will immediately benefit from the closure because they will be able to sell their oil and gas at a higher prices. But if they do it for long, inflation will start rising in USA, and Mr. Trump will be under a pressure of impeachment if inflation is not controlled. So a long closure is not beneficial for USA either. Now consider Israel. Israel is least impacted by Strait of Hormuz, and I think they are okay if Hormuz closes or opens anytime soon. And they are basically indifferent. So three out of four players in this entire war would not like Strait of Hormuz to be closed for long. And let's just hope that sense will prevail among these actors, and we will soon see an end to this crisis. Uh, and with that, I would like to close the video. I will see you next time with another topic. Please like, share, and subscribe if you like the content.